My name is Olivia Hart, and I collapsed at my own master's graduation before I ever stepped on stage. While doctors tried calling my parents, urging them to come, I lay on the cold floor, unable to feel my own hands. They never answered. They never showed up. Instead, as I was being wheeled into the ER, my sister posted a smiling photo at a backyard BBQ with the caption, "Family day without the drama." That was the moment something inside me finally snapped, not in pain, but in clarity. I realized I had spent my entire life trying to be enough for people who didn't even see me. And for the first time, I decided to see myself. If you've ever reached that breaking point, the moment you chose, you tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? So I know I'm not alone in this. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone waved at each other from their porches and where neighbors judged your entire life through the glow of your Christmas lights. Every December, my parents wrapped our little one-story house in strings of gold and red, draped garlands along the railings, and placed a plastic lit-up reindeer on the patchy lawn. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, cozy, cheerful, stable. But inside, the walls held a different story, one built slowly and quietly, long before I was old enough to understand what favoritism even meant. As far back as I can remember, I was the responsible one. No one said it outright at first, it was simply expected. I made my own bed before school, I folded laundry without being asked, and I knew exactly how long to leave the chicken in the oven because Mom often shouted instructions from the living room while helping my little sister, Sabrina, find her lost sparkly shoes. By the time I was 6, I could pack Sabrina's backpack, slice apples for her snack, and braid her hair better than our mother ever did. Looking back, I realized they treated me like a tiny adult long before I even stopped playing with crayons. Sabrina, on the other hand, was the princess. That word floated around our household as casually as the scent of Mom's vanilla candles. "Where's my princess?" Dad would call out the moment he walked through the door, even if I had been the one setting the table or helping carry groceries from the car. Sabrina's slightest frown was met with soothing voices and gentle hugs, while my tears were dismissed with a tired sigh or a reminder that life isn't always fair, Olivia. Whenever Sabrina and I fought over toys, space, or something as small as who got the bigger slice of cake, the blame fell on me. "You're older," they said. "You should know better." Sabrina is sensitive. Sensitive became the shield she hid behind, and strong became the box I was locked inside. The earliest clear memory of unfairness I still carry happened when we broke Mom's favorite ceramic vase, one of those tall cream-colored ones with hand-painted blue flowers. We had been playing tag in the living room even though we weren't supposed to. Sabrina bumped into me, I bumped into the vase, and down it went. Mom stormed in, eyes wide, and before I could explain, Sabrina burst into tears. Big, dramatic ones. Mom immediately knelt beside her, cooing, brushing the hair off her cheeks, asking if she was okay. I stood silently, my heart pounding. When Sabrina sobbed, Olivia pushed me. Mom didn't question it. She turned to me with a sharp, disappointed stare and ordered me to clean up the mess carefully so I wouldn't cut myself. Sabrina sniffled her way into Dad's arms when he came home, telling him I was mean. I don't remember anyone asking if I was okay. Birthdays were another reminder. Mine were simple, a small cake on the kitchen counter, 2 or 3 candles, sometimes a grocery store card signed by both of them at the last minute. They would usually come home late, tired, apologizing about work. "We'll make it up to you next year, sweetheart," they'd say. They never did. But Sabrina's birthdays? Those were productions. Banners, balloons, matching plates, and cups with whatever princess character she was obsessed with that year. The living room turned into a pink explosion. She got piles of presents, and all her friends from school came over for backyard games and cotton candy. I always stood at the edge of those parties, helping Mom refill lemonade pitchers or passing out slices of cake while Dad snapped photos of Sabrina blowing kisses at the camera. I smiled, because that was my role: smile, help, stand aside. There was a phrase Dad repeated, so often it became the soundtrack of my childhood. "You're strong, Olivia. Don't make a fuss." Your sister needs more attention, she's fragile. I heard it when Sabrina took my toys. I heard it when she ruined my school project with spilled paint and somehow cried her way out of blame. I heard it when I tried to tell them I felt left out. And each time Dad said it, something inside me folded smaller, tighter, until I believed that needing comfort or help or love made me weak. Strong meant silent. Strong meant invisible. I don't think I truly understood what that belief did to me until years later, but one memory stands out like a quiet bruise. I was 8. It was winter. I had a fever that made my whole body feel heavy and floaty at the same time. I curled up on the living room sofa with a blanket pressed under my chin, shivering. I waited for Mom to sit with me, to stroke my hair the way she did with Sabrina whenever she sneezed once. But instead, Mom and Dad rushed around getting Sabrina ready for her dance recital. Her tiny red costume glittered under the living room lights, her hair tied in a bun Dad called Picture Perfect. She twirled once, giggling, while I tried to keep my eyes open. When Mom finally noticed me on the sofa, she only said, "We'll be back in a couple hours. There's soup in the fridge if you're hungry." They left in a hurry, Sabrina shouting, "Wish me luck," as the door closed behind them. I watched the house get dark as the winter sun disappeared, wrapped in my blanket, alone with the sound of the heater kicking on and off. I must have fallen asleep waiting for them to come home. Even now, decades later, I can still picture that small living room, the dim lamp, the ticking wall clock, the ache behind my eyes. Maybe that was the first night I learned what my place in the family was. Maybe it was the first time my body understood that when I needed someone, no one was coming. By the time I was old enough to put words to it, I had already learned a quiet, painful truth. Strength was just another word for enduring everything alone. And maybe, without realizing it, that was the day my body began practicing how to stay silent, how to keep going even when it was breaking, just like my heart would learn to do for years to come. By the time I reached high school, the labels my parents had given us, me as the strong one, Sabrina as the sensitive one, had already settled into the foundation of our family like permanent ink. I tried to believe that maybe things would change when I got older, that maybe responsibility and goodness would finally be seen instead of assumed. So I threw myself into school. I studied late into the night, volunteered at the library, worked part-time stacking books and organizing dusty shelves, and dreamed quietly about a future where I could help people who felt as invisible as I often did. I imagined myself becoming someone who listened, someone who cared, someone who didn't walk past other people's pain the way my parents had walked past mine. That dream kept me steady. It gave me something gentle to hold on to. Sabrina, on the other hand, seemed to transform overnight into the kind of teenager every parent claimed to fear but secretly excused. She spent more time at the mall than at home, changed her hair color every 2 weeks, and seemed to drift in and out of trouble the way most girls drifted between hobbies. When she got caught vaping in the school bathroom, my parents said she was going through a phase. When she cut class for an entire week to follow her older boyfriend around town, they grounded her for a day but still let her go to a concert that weekend because she already had the tickets. Every misstep she made was brushed off with a shrug and a sigh about how girls her age struggle. While every small mistake I made felt like a mark against the perfect record I was expected to maintain. But the moment that carved itself deepest into me happened on a rainy Wednesday evening during junior year. Sabrina had borrowed the family car without permission, a tan Toyota Camry. Dad babied as if it were a second child and ended up scraping the side of a parked vehicle in the grocery store lot. By the time she got home, shaking and babbling about how she could get expelled if the school found out she had been off campus, Mom had gone white. And Dad paced in circles, trying to figure out how to contain the situation. Then, almost in unison, they turned to me. I remember the look on Dad's face, desperate, stern, certain. "Olivia," he said, "you need to tell the officer you were the one driving. Your sister can't afford to have this on her record. You're responsible. You can handle it." I wanted to say no. I wanted to scream, "Why is it always me?" But Sabrina was sobbing so loudly. I couldn't hear my own pulse anymore, and Mom kept rubbing her shoulders saying, "We can't let this ruin her future. I don't know what ruined me more, their expectation or the ease with which I finally nodded. So, when the police officer came, notebook in hand, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, I lied. I told him it was me who had borrowed the car, me who had misjudged the space, me who had panicked. That lie became an official note in a report, a small but permanent bruise on my record. Meanwhile, Sabrina stood behind the living room curtain, peeking out at the patrol car, untouched and clean, her future neatly protected behind the fragile curtain of being the sensitive one. It's no double Divigado, our sported otter. I remember standing in the hallway after the officer left, feeling the cold tile under my feet and the heavy silence between the four of us. No one thanked me. No one asked if I was scared. Dad simply clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "That's why we can count on you." In that moment, something inside me cracked, not loudly, not violently, just quietly enough for me to hear it. I wasn't a daughter. I was a shield. A solution. A tool. The loneliness that grew from moments like that seeped into parts of me I didn't have names for yet. I found myself lingering after school, staying in the library where the quiet shelves and the soft hum of fluorescent lights felt safer than home. One afternoon, while I was reshelving a cart of novels, Mrs. Parker, the school counselor, stopped beside me. She had kind eyes, the kind that made you feel seen even when you weren't looking for attention. "Olivia," she said, "you've been spacing out lately. Everything okay?" Those words, simple, ordinary, felt like someone had opened a window in a room I'd forgotten was stifling. I hesitated, but something inside me finally spilled out. I told her about the vase, the birthdays, the car incident, the way I felt like a ghost in my own home. She listened without interrupting, without minimizing, without telling me to be strong. And when I finished, she said softly, "You deserve a life where you're not carrying everyone else's weight." She was the first person to suggest I apply for colleges out of state. Boston, she said, had schools with excellent social work programs and abundant financial aid for students like me. The idea of leaving Pennsylvania felt impossible at first, terrifying even. But it also felt like breathing for the first time in years. I filled out applications late at night when everyone else was asleep, typing silently in the dark, afraid my dreams would make too much noise. Weeks passed. Then months. And one spring afternoon, an envelope arrived. I got a partial scholarship to a university in Boston. My heart raced. My hands shook. For the first time, the future felt like something I might be allowed to choose. When I told my parents, the reaction was immediate and crushing. "Boston?" Dad repeated as if I had announced I was moving to another planet. "Why on earth would you go that far away?" Mom crossed her arms. "Who's going to help out around here? Your sister can't handle things on her own." They spoke as if the entire decision rested not on my ability, my academic record, or my hard work, but on their needs, their convenience, their comfort. For the first time, I pushed back. My voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I can work part-time," I said. "I'll cover whatever the scholarship doesn't. I need to do this." For me, they didn't applaud. They didn't hug me. They didn't even look proud. Dad sighed. The heavy, dramatic kind meant to guilt me into backing down. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't forget family comes first." That sentence felt like a chain being looped around my wrist. But I tucked away the hurt, packed my bags, and accepted the silence that followed. The day I left our little Pennsylvania town, the sky was gray, and the air smelled like rain. I loaded my suitcases into a bus that would take me to a life I could barely imagine, glancing once at the house with the maple tree out front and the windows my parents never looked out of for me. I told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough, they would finally see me, finally choose me. As the bus pulled away, I whispered a quiet promise to myself. If I become someone worth being proud of, maybe one day they'll love me the way I've always loved them. I didn't know then how wrong I was. Boston felt like another world when I first arrived, bigger, louder, faster than anything I had ever known in Pennsylvania. The air smelled like roasted coffee, damp brick, and ambition. The sidewalks were always busy, the subway screeched through the tunnels like a restless animal, and the campus buildings rose tall and cold against the New England sky. It should have been overwhelming, but instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: possibility. For once, my future felt like it belonged to me. I threw myself into college the same way I had thrown myself into everything else, with quiet determination. My days started before sunrise. I worked the opening shift at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, tying my apron in the dim light while the manager unlocked the door. I learned the rhythm of the espresso machine, the steady hiss of steamed milk, the smell of ground beans clinging to my clothes long after my shift ended. At 7 a.m., caffeine-fueled students rushed in, bleary-eyed and impatient, thrusting crumpled bills at me while tapping their shoes against the tile. By 8:30, I was sprinting across campus to make it to my morning lecture. Afternoons were spent in the library, where I held a student job reshelving books, sorting returns, and wiping down tables still sticky from late-night study sessions. It was quiet work, gentle work, exactly the kind of space I needed after years of living inside chaos I couldn't name. Sometimes, while pushing carts through the aisles, I'd imagine my younger self hiding between the shelves, tiny, tired, longing for quiet, finally finding it here. Evenings were for studying, nights were for catching up, and weekends were for picking up extra shifts whenever possible. I lived on instant noodles, clearance bin vegetables, and coffee I made by accident at the shop so I could drink it for free. I didn't go to parties. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't explore the city. Everything I earned went into survival. Or at least, it was supposed to. It started small, just $50 here, $100 there. Mom called one night during midterms, sounding stressed. "Your dad's hours got cut," she said. "We're short on the electric bill. Can you help out a little?" I wired her $100 the next morning before buying groceries for myself. A week later, Dad called about the water bill. "It's just temporary," he said. "You're always so responsible." He said it like a compliment, but I heard the chains tightening. Still, I sent another 100. Then came Sabrina. Of course it did. One afternoon, while I was wiping down counters at the library, my phone buzzed with a message from her. "Liv, can you please help? My credit card is maxed and I need to pay rent or they'll kick me out." A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the part shaped by years of, "You're strong," Olivia grabbed my wallet. I sent her money I couldn't spare, telling myself it was just this once. It wasn't. Every bad decision Sabrina made seemed to land at my feet. When she overdrafted her checking account because she bought concert tickets instead of groceries, I covered it. When she quit her job after 2 weeks because her manager looked at her wrong, I covered her rent again. When she got into a minor fender bender and needed money for repairs, I skipped buying textbooks for myself and borrowed them from classmates instead. Each time I tried to push back, my parents reminded me, "Your sister is under a lot of pressure. You know she's not as strong as you." And each time, I felt the old guilt rise in my throat until I swallowed it down. Some days, I was proud of myself. Helping felt good, felt meaningful even when it hurt. I told myself that family was worth sacrifices, that maybe love was measured in how much you were willing to give. Other days, the resentment sat heavy on my chest. I'd walk past shop windows and see shoes or coats I desperately needed, but the moment I reached for my wallet, I'd remember Sabrina's messages and close my hand again. It became a silent ritual. Want, reach, stop, send money home. My body eventually began to protest. One afternoon, during sophomore year, I stood up too quickly in a lecture hall and the room spun violently. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, surrounded by concerned classmates. I brushed it off as dehydration or a lack of sleep. A few weeks later, it happened again, this time on the bus ride to work. The driver shook me gently awake, asking if I needed medical help. I apologized, stepped off at the next stop, and convinced myself that everything was fine. I didn't have time to be sick. People needed me, my family needed me. And I had learned long ago that my needs didn't matter anyway. Years passed in this rhythm: work, school, send money, repeat. Eventually, I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I remember holding the diploma in my hands, feeling the weight of it, thinking maybe, finally, someone would be proud. I called my parents afterward, expecting excitement, maybe "we knew you could do it." Instead, Dad said, "That's great, Olivia. Listen, Sabrina is in a tough spot again." And just like that, my accomplishment shrank into the background, swallowed by their never-ending emergencies. Still, something inside me held on. I found a job quickly after graduation, an entry-level social support position at a nonprofit in Boston. It didn't pay much, but it mattered to me. I helped teenagers in crisis, families struggling with housing, people who felt unseen by everyone around them. Maybe I gravitated toward them because I understood that feeling too well. My parents told everyone in Pennsylvania that their daughter worked in community services, as if it was their achievement. They bragged to neighbors about how proud they were. But when I called home, it was clear nothing had changed. They still needed help. Sabrina still needed rescuing. And I was still the one expected to step up without hesitation. I didn't realize it then, but the path to my collapse began in these years in the small sacrifices, the quiet exhaustion, the weight of always being the strong one. Looking back, those were the years my heart began whispering warnings I wasn't ready to hear. And my body, already strained, was only waiting for the moment it would finally give out. By the time I had settled into my job at the nonprofit, a quiet but persistent thought began forming at the back of my mind, an ache, a longing for something more. I loved the work I did, but the limitations of my role weighed on me. I saw how much more licensed clinicians could do, the doors that opened for them, the salaries they earned, the impact they could make in people's lives. I wanted that. I wanted the training, the deeper skills, the chance to lift others in ways I had never been lifted myself. And, in the quiet corners of my mind, I also wanted the financial stability that had always slipped through my fingers like water. So, during one late-night shift at the office, I opened my laptop and began researching Masters in Clinical Social Work programs. MSWs, and Boston had some of the best in the country. When I told my parents about my plan to apply, the reaction was instant and sharp, like touching a hot pan you didn't realize was on. "More school?" Dad scoffed over the phone. "Why don't you focus on working? The family needs you. Your sister is still trying to find her footing." Mom added, "A master's isn't cheap, Olivia. We can't help you. You know that." The implication was clear. Anything I chose that didn't directly benefit them was selfish. I was expected to help, support, and fill in the gaps, not to grow. But something in me refused to shrink this time. Maybe it was Boston's air, colder and clearer than Pennsylvania's. Maybe it was the faces of the teenagers I helped every day at work, the ones who said they wished they had someone like me in their corner. Maybe it was simply that I was tired of being used, tired of giving pieces of myself away like loose change, so I applied to 3 programs. I didn't tell my parents until I received the acceptance email. The financial aid package included a partial scholarship, permission to work while studying, and the option to take out student loans. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. For once, possibility felt like enough. My father didn't congratulate me. He didn't even pause to consider what this meant to me. "So you're taking out loans now?" he said. "Great. Just great. More debt. What if something happens to us? What if your sister needs help?" Mom chimed in, as if reading from a script. "This is a lot, Olivia. Are you sure you're not doing too much?" I wanted to laugh. If only they knew how often I wondered the same thing. But I simply said, "Yes, I'm sure." Once the semester began, my life became a carefully balanced chaos. I worked full-time at a community hospital where the halls always smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic that clung to the back of your throat. I attended classes at night, rushing across the city with my backpack bouncing against my shoulder. I studied during lunch breaks, on the subway, in the laundry room of my apartment building while waiting for my clothes to dry. And every weekend, instead of resting, I covered shifts on a crisis. Hotline, listening to trembling voices on the other end of the phone, walking strangers back from the edge with soft, steady words. But no matter how busy I was, my family always knew how to reach me. "The electricity bill is overdue." Dad would text, "Can you cover it?" "Sabrina lost her job again," Mom would say. "She's embarrassed." "Can you help with rent?" "Just this month." "We're behind on the car payment," came another message. "It's only temporary." It was never temporary. Every message felt like a hook sinking deeper into my skin, pulling me back into the role I thought I had escaped when I left Pennsylvania. But the guilt was stronger than the exhaustion. So I sent money, sometimes $100, sometimes $500, sometimes more than I could reasonably spare. I cut back on groceries. I stopped buying new shoes, even when mine began to tear at the soles. I canceled every social plan I had because I couldn't afford to eat out or take the subway more than absolutely necessary. The irony of it all blurred into something almost painful one night during my hospital shift. I had just finished counseling a patient who had survived a suicide attempt, a teenager whose parents dismissed her pain so completely she believed ending her life was the only way to be heard. I sat with her for nearly an hour, telling her things I never told myself. Your feelings matter. You deserve support. You don't have to carry everything alone. After she was settled safely with the psychiatric team, I stepped into the tiny staff break room, washed my hands, and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Mom. 3 from Sabrina. A text from Dad. We need help. Bills are piling up. Sabrina is overwhelmed. Transfer something as soon as you can. I stared at the screen, numb. A patient had just trusted me with their most fragile fears, and here I was, unable to hold my own boundaries. I transferred the money, standing under the flickering fluorescent lights, my ID badge still clipped crookedly to my shirt. And as I watched the confirmation appear on my banking app, a bitter laugh rose in my throat. I spent my days teaching people how to build healthy boundaries, yet I didn't have a single one of my own. The first seed of awakening came during a late-night class on trauma-informed care. My professor, a woman with silver hair and an impossibly gentle voice, said, "If you give and give until you collapse, that isn't love. That's self-abandonment." The room went silent. Something inside me cracked, not the way it had when I protected Sabrina all those years, not the way it had when my parents dismissed my dreams, but deeper, more dangerous. The words echoed long after I walked out of the classroom, down the quiet hallway, and into the cold night air. Self-abandonment. I had never heard a phrase that described my life so perfectly. It haunted me, it followed me. But it didn't stop me. Not yet. I wasn't ready to let go, not of them, not of the guilt, not of the version of love I had been trained to believe in since childhood. It would take something bigger to break me open. Something catastrophic. Something that would come on the day I thought was supposed to be the proudest of my life. The week before my graduation felt like a blur of deadlines, shifts, and obligations piled so tightly together that I could barely tell one day from the next. The hospital hallways were slick with the smell of antiseptic, ringing with overhead pages, and buzzing with the kind of exhaustion that clung to your skin long after you left work. I was finishing my capstone paper, juggling night shifts in the psych unit, and covering 2 emergency cases for a coworker who had gone home with the flu. My laptop was always open, propped on my knees during breaks, balanced on the counter while I scarfed down reheated soup, glowing beside me during the short hours I slept. Somewhere in the chaos, my body began to whisper warnings I refused to hear. It started as a faint tightness in my chest, something I blamed on caffeine or lack of sleep. Then came the shortness of breath. I'd walk up a single flight of stairs and feel my pulse race as if I'd run a marathon. My hands shook when I typed, my vision blurred now and then, especially at night. And the kind of tiredness I felt wasn't the usual. I need a nap, kind it was bone-tired, soul-tired, as if someone had drained the last bit of life out of me and I was still expected to keep going. A fellow clinician, Mark, noticed before I did. One evening, after I finished assisting with a crisis assessment for a teenager who had been admitted for self-harm, he caught me leaning against the wall outside the unit, my breathing uneven. "Liv, you okay?" he asked, his eyebrows knitting in concern. "You don't look good." I tried to laugh it off, but even that felt heavy. "Just finals week," I said. "Once graduation's over, I'll sleep for a year." He wasn't convinced. "Go get checked out." "Seriously? You're pale." But I shook my head. "I just need to make it through one more week. I'll rest after." He opened his mouth to argue, but another emergency page pulled him away. And just like that, the moment passed. I pushed the dizziness down, hid it somewhere between my ribs, and pretended it was nothing. I'd gotten good at pretending. My whole life was pretending. Pretending I wasn't tired. Pretending I didn't need help. Pretending I could handle everything alone. It was familiar. It was dangerous. Meanwhile, my family buzzed louder than my health. My parents called every other night to remind me how proud they were and how they couldn't wait to post the graduation photos online. "I'll take videos of you walking across the stage," Mom said, excitement dripping from her voice. "Everyone on Facebook will be so impressed." My daughter, the master's graduate. It sounded sweet on the surface, but I knew better. It wasn't about me. It was about the image, about how they could use my accomplishments to polish their reputation in that tiny Pennsylvania town. Sabrina, of course, had her own commentary. "Just don't be dramatic, okay?" she said during a phone call while chewing gum so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is supposed to be a happy weekend. You always ruin the vibe when you cry or act stressed." I remember standing in the hospital stairwell, listening to her dismissiveness echo off the concrete walls, wondering if she had ever once considered that my stress came from carrying the weight of our entire family. And then, predictably, the true crisis arrived, one that had nothing to do with my health and everything to do with Sabrina. It was 3 days before graduation when her name flashed across my screen. The message was long, frantic, and sprinkled with screenshots threatening legal action. She had defaulted on a credit card tied to some business opportunity she swore would make her rich. The company claimed she owed thousands. They were threatening to sue. "Liv, please," she typed. "If this goes to court, I'll die. I need $4,000 today." Today. I didn't even have $4,000, not really. But my parents called within minutes, voices shaking as if they were the ones being sued. "You have to help him," Mom cried. "It's weak, you know it," Dad chimed in. "If this goes on her record, it'll ruin her future. You're the only one who can fix this." That line, "you're the only one who can fix this," was one I had heard my whole life, and every time, it burrowed deeper under my skin. I sat in the staff break room, the smell of microwaved noodles hanging in the air, my scrubs smeared with hours of work. I hadn't even processed yet, and I stared at the numbers in my bank account. It wasn't much. It was everything I had. My graduation gown was still in its plastic bag. My final project deadlines chimed as notifications in the background. And I transferred the money, almost all of it. My hands trembled not from regret, but from exhaustion so heavy it felt cemented inside my bones. "Thank you, Liv. You're the best sister ever," Sabrina texted minutes later, followed by a pink heart emoji. No apology. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice. Just a transactional thank you, as if I had handed her a napkin instead of my future stability. That night, the night before graduation, I barely slept. I stayed up editing my final paper, double-checking citations, and ironing my graduation gown until my arms felt like they were made of lead. The dizziness came in waves. My chest felt tight. My legs shook when I stood. At one point, while brushing my teeth, I caught my reflection in the mirror and froze. Dark circles like bruises bloomed under my eyes. My face looked hollow, almost translucent, as if the girl staring back at me was fading. My heart thudded unevenly, each beat feeling too heavy for my chest to hold. But I still whispered to myself, "Just get through tomorrow." As if the next day would magically fix years of depletion. As if a ceremony could refill everything life had drained out of me. I set my alarm, laid out my gown, and crawled into bed with the room tilting around me. The last thing I remember thinking before I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep was, "I just need to cross that stage once. Just once." I couldn't have known that the price of just getting through tomorrow would be my own body collapsing under the weight of everything I refused to let go. Graduation morning arrived wrapped in the kind of bright, cold sunlight Boston is famous for in late May, the kind that sparkles on every surface but never fully warms your skin. I felt it on my face as I walked across campus in my gown, the fabric heavy against my weak shoulders, the cap tugging slightly at my hair. The university's main lawn had transformed into a sea of white folding chairs arranged in perfect rows, stretching from the stage all the way to the back fence. Strings of banners hung from lampposts, trembling gently in the breeze. The brass band in the corner played cheerful, triumphant notes that cut through the morning air. Families filled the aisles, waving small flags with their children's names printed on them, holding signs painted with glitter. "We're proud of you. You did it. Master's graduate." Everywhere I looked, there were hugs and laughter and camera flashes. I found my seat among the hundreds of graduates, my heart beat loud, my breath shallow. The dizziness from the night before still lingered at the edges of my vision like fogged glass. I scanned the bleachers, squinting past the sun's glare, trying to spot my parents or Sabrina. Nothing. I tilted my head, searching again. I saw families holding giant bouquets. I saw a father hoist his toddler onto his shoulders for a better view. I saw friends waving wildly at each other, but I didn't see my family. A vibration in my pocket made me flinch. It was a text from Mom. "Traffic jam, don't worry. We'll get there soon. We're stuck in traffic, sweetheart. Go ahead, we'll be there soon." I stared at the message, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. I typed back a simple, "Okay," even though my fingers trembled. Maybe they really were on the way. Maybe they cared enough to try. I clung to that thought like a rope. The ceremony began. The university president spoke about resilience, perseverance, and the meaning of service. I heard every word, but absorbed none of them. My mind kept circling back to the empty stretch of seats where my family should have been. When the dean began calling names, applause erupted for each graduate. Some names were met with entire rows of people cheering, screaming, chanting. When they reached the H's, my pulse quickened. My palms grew damp. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. Olivia Hart. For a split second, everything felt silent, even the band, even the wind. I stood, gripping the edge of my gown to steady myself. My legs felt heavy and numb, as though they belonged to someone else. I forced a smile as I stepped into the aisle. The world around me slowed. My ears rang. The applause blurred into one continuous, distant hum. I tried to draw a full breath but couldn't. My chest tightened painfully. The stage lights swirled in front of my eyes like melting stars. I took one step, then another. Then the floor seemed to tilt. My knees buckled beneath me. A sharp gasp rose from the audience, followed by scattered shouts. Someone dropped a water bottle near my feet. My vision tunneled into darkness, and the last thing I heard was the muffled echo of my name before everything went silent. When I opened my eyes again, bright fluorescent lights pierced through the haze. The antiseptic smell of the emergency department filled my lungs. I was lying on a hospital bed, a thin blanket draped over me. Machines beeped steadily at my side. A nurse adjusted the IV line in my arm, and a doctor stood at the foot of my bed, flipping through a chart. His expression was concerned but calm. "Olivia? Can you hear me?" he asked gently. I nodded weakly. My tongue felt thick. The doctor explained, "You've experienced severe exhaustion, possibly a combination of sleep deprivation, stress-induced arrhythmia, and dehydration. Your body essentially forced you to stop." His words floated around me like smoke. I listened, but a different question burned inside me. Did my parents come?" I whispered. The doctor paused, just long enough for me to feel the truth sharpen. "We called the number listed as your emergency contact," he said carefully. "We left several voicemails. They didn't arrive. It seems they were busy." His eyes softened, as if he wasn't sure whether to say more. I closed mine, not because I was tired, but because the alternative was letting him see the crack forming in me. Later, when my hands had stopped shaking enough for me to reach for my phone, I unlocked the screen with trembling fingers. Notifications flooded in messages, missed calls, and one tagged photo from Sabrina. I tapped it, expecting maybe an update or a question about how I was feeling. Instead, a bright, cheerful picture appeared. It was my parents' backyard. The old wooden fence. The grill smoking. Sabrina in the center, holding a glass of rosé, smiling wide. Mom and Dad on either side of her, plates piled with food, surrounded by friends. Sunset painted the sky orange behind them. The caption read, "Family day without the drama." Best decision ever. The room tilted slightly, though I knew it was just my blood pressure still adjusting. I zoomed in on the photo. I studied their faces, the laughter, the comfort, the ease. And then I looked at the IV taped to my arm, the bruising beneath it, the pale hospital gown. I lay under harsh hospital lights while my family celebrated not having to deal with me. Shock didn't come. Shock would have felt like something. Instead, there was only a numbness so deep it almost felt gentle. A final confirmation of a truth my heart had known for years but refused to accept. I had never really belonged there. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not even as a thought worth showing up for. I lowered the phone slowly, staring up at the sterile ceiling tiles, listening to the soft beep of the monitor beside me. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Not this time. Something in me had broken silently, a fracture, so clean it felt like clarity. Okay, I whispered to no one. I understand now. For the first time in my life, I wasn't saying it out of obedience. I was saying it out of awakening. The first full day in the hospital felt like waking up inside someone else's life, one where the body I had always forced into obedience finally mutinied. I lay there, surrounded by machines that monitored every beat and breath, and for the first time in years, I had nowhere to run and nothing to give. The doctor assigned to my case, Dr. Whitman, visited me each morning with a clipboard in one hand and the kind of expression people reserve for tragic news. He explained everything in calm, measured tones, the arrhythmia, the cortisol levels, the dehydration, the signs of neurological strain from chronic sleep deprivation. If you continue at the pace you've been going, he said one morning, pulling up a stool beside my bed, you're putting yourself at risk of long-term cardiac complications, severe anxiety disorder, major depressive episodes. You are extremely lucky you collapsed here, not alone somewhere. His words didn't frighten me the way they should have. Instead, they felt embarrassingly predictable, like hearing the ending of a story I'd been trying not to read. Of course, I was here. Of course, my body finally broke. I had pushed it, ignored it, denied it for years. And now it was asking for a debt I couldn't delay anymore. Later that afternoon, I met with the hospital's psychologist, Dr. Lan, because the team had flagged my case as one that required mental health intervention. The irony was bitter, the helper becoming the patient. Sitting across from her in a small consultation room, I felt stripped bare. She asked gentle but piercing questions about work, school, sleep, family. And then, almost casually, she asked, if you were discharged tomorrow, who would you call to take you home? The silence that followed stretched unbearably wide. I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. Not my mom's name, not my dad's, not even Sabrina's. Because I knew, with a clarity that felt like a slap, that none of them would come. Not reliably, not willingly, not lovingly. My throat tightened. I pressed my nails into my palm beneath the blanket. Dr. Lang didn't rush me. She simply nodded, as if she already understood the shape of my pain. It's okay if the answer is no one, she said softly. But it's important to know that. To question it. That night, after she left, I cried for the first time since collapsing silent, exhausted tears that soaked into the stiff hospital pillow. Not because I wanted my family there, but because I finally admitted they wouldn't be. The next day, Jenna arrived. Jenna, my coworker, my classmate, and the closest thing I'd ever had to a friend who actually showed up without needing anything from me. She pushed open the door with a burst of energy the sterile room had never seen, carrying a paper bag that smelled like fresh soup and a small bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. You look like crap, she said cheerfully, then paused, her eyes softening. But you're alive. Thank God. She sat beside my bed, unpacking the food, chattering about the unit drama at work, the ridiculous papers due next week, the guy she was seeing who couldn't tell the difference between a boundary and a suggestion. Then, after a moment of quiet, she looked at me seriously and said, I heard the hospital couldn't reach your parents. So, if you want, I can be your emergency contact. I mean it. The words hit me with more force than any diagnosis. Someone wanted to be responsible for me, not out of obligation, not out of manipulation, but out of genuine care. It was the first time I understood what people meant when they talked about chosen family. The next morning, when the nurse brought in the emergency contact form, my hands trembled slightly as I signed Jenna's name and crossed out the numbers that had belonged to my parents for years. It felt like cutting a thread I had been tangled in since birth. A quiet, painful liberation. With a new clarity came a strange burst of resolve. I asked the nurse for my laptop. When it arrived, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers that had drained away over the years: deposits to my parents, transfers to Sabrina, automatic payments I had set up out of habit or guilt. I clicked through every line, every subscription, every shared account. My stomach twisted as I realized how much of my life I had forfeited without even realizing it. I began shutting things down one by one, canceling automatic payments, removing myself from shared bills, closing the joint account my parents insisted would make things easier. When I discovered that 2 utilities were still in my name at my parents' house, I emailed the companies directly. Then I booked an online appointment with a financial attorney, a small decision with enormous implications. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was preparation, protection. For once, I wasn't moving for their benefit. I was moving for mine. That evening, lying in the dim glow of the monitor beside me, I stared at the IV taped to my arm. The bruising around the insertion site had turned a deep purple, spreading like ink beneath my skin. The room hummed with the steady rhythm of machines measuring my survival. And I thought, with an honesty that chilled me, if I had died that day, how long would they have cried? A minute? An hour? A single Facebook post? Or would Sabrina have simply uploaded another smiling picture with the caption, "Less drama now"? The thought didn't devastate me the way it once would have. It solidified something. A realization so sharp it felt like stepping into cold, clean air. For the first time in my life, I no longer wanted to live in a way that kept them happy. I no longer wanted to survive so they could use me. I didn't belong to them anymore. My life, my energy, my future, they were mine. And lying there under the fluorescent lights, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not abandon myself again. Not for them. Not for anyone. A few days passed in the hospital, each one slow and strangely quiet, as if time itself was afraid to move too quickly around someone so fragile. My body was still tethered to an IV line, and the cold sensors of the heart monitor clung to my skin. I was stable, Dr. Whitman said, but not yet strong. My limbs felt heavy, my breath thin, my head wrapped in cotton. But inside, where the old instincts once lived, where guilt and duty used to grip me, I felt something loosening, something shifting. I didn't call my family. I didn't text them. I didn't even open their earlier messages. I simply waited. Not out of strategy, not yet, but out of curiosity. If I disappeared from their world for a few days, what would they do? For most of my life, I believed the answer would be panic, concern, love. But now, lying under sterile lights with my veins still bruised from collapsed exhaustion, I wasn't so sure. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone began vibrating violently against the metal bedside table. At first I ignored it. Then the screen lit up again, and again, and again, the sound buzzing like an alarm that wouldn't stop. Annoyed, I reached over and switched off the silent mode. The vibrations grew even more frantic. When I finally unlocked the screen, everything froze. 75 missed calls. From Mom. From Dad. From home. From Sabrina. Dozens of messages flooded the notification center, long, chaotic threads that came in waves. Some were accusatory. Why are you ignoring us? What do you mean by silence? Others tried guilt. We're worried. You can't just disappear like this. And then the tone shifted to desperation. Pick up. It's urgent. Call now. Live, please. But the one that sliced through everything was a single text from Dad, short and commanding, as if I were a tool left out in the yard instead of his daughter, lying in a hospital bed. We need you. Answer, immediately. The words triggered nothing warm in me, no flicker of hope, no sense of belonging. Instead, a coldness spread slowly through my chest. A chilling clarity. This wasn't about love. They didn't know I was in the hospital. They weren't panicking because they thought I was hurt. They needed something. And after a lifetime with them, I knew exactly what it meant when they needed me. Instead of calling back, I sat there, breathing through the ache in my ribs, and scrolled through the messages in reverse order. The earliest ones were almost mocking in contrast. Dad had sent a picture of their backyard BBQ, another one, different angle but this time accompanied by the caption, "Another great family day." "Shame you missed it," Mom had replied with emojis. Sabrina had posted a selfie by the grill with the caption, "Better without the drama." I stared at those images, then watched as hours later the tone darkened. "Liv, answer your phone. Pick up. We need you. Sabrina's in trouble. Call us now. Don't you dare ignore us." My pulse steadied not from calm, but from confirmation. I kept scrolling. Soon, bits and pieces of the truth formed a shape messy at first, then clearer with every message. Sabrina had been in a car accident. A serious one. She'd been driving recklessly, possibly intoxicated, and hit another vehicle. Insurance wouldn't cover the full damages. The other driver was threatening legal action. There were police reports, court documents, a bank involved. My stomach tightened as I read further. A sick familiarity washed over me. At some point, God knows when, my parents had used an old digital copy of my signature. They had put my name on a loan. Not a small one, a substantial sum, supposedly taken out for family reasons. In the messages, Mom tried to downplay it. "It's just a technique. Don't overdo it. We did it to help Sabrina. She needed a co-signer." Then the truth sharpened. The bank now needed my confirmation. My physical signature, my voice on the phone. The documents had reached the stage where my direct involvement was legally required. Without it, everything they owned, everything they feared losing was at risk. Of course they needed me. Not because I had collapsed. Not because I was hurting. Not because I was their daughter lying in a hospital room alone. They needed me because their lies finally caught up to them. My hands trembled not out of fear, but from a hollow, exhausted anger. My IV tugged slightly as I shifted in bed, the needle pressing deeper into my skin. I thought about all the nights I stayed up working, all the money I sent home, all the times I sacrificed my own stability so they could pretend our family was functional. And still, even now, they saw me not as a human being, but as a solution, a safety net, a wallet with a pulse. I opened the last message from Dad again. "We need you. Answer immediately." The entitlement was staggering. The lack of hesitation. The assumption that I would always pick up, always fix, always save them even from disasters they created themselves. A slow breath left my chest as I stared at my bruised arms, the IV line, the cold room around me. And there it was, the truth, as bitter and undeniable as the antiseptic smell I couldn't escape. Even lying here, half broken, barely recovering from the collapse my life had spiraled into, they still didn't see me. They saw what I could provide, what I could cover, what I could sacrifice. I leaned back into the stiff pillow, letting the numbness settle. And with a clarity that felt like steel cooling into shape, I whispered the words that closed the chapter of my old life. Even now, with needles still in my arm, they don't see a daughter. A pause. They see a walking wallet. And, for the first time, I didn't feel guilt for thinking it. I felt truth. The morning after the storm of missed calls, the hospital room felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just me more awake, more aware, stripped of the fog I had lived under for years. The nurse had just changed my IV bag, the clear liquid dripping like a metronome, steady and indifferent. My phone sat on the rolling tray beside me, black screen reflecting the fluorescent lights like a tiny, fragile mirror. I stared at it for a long time, not with fear, not with guilt, but with a strange, quiet clarity. If this conversation was going to happen, and it clearly needed to, I wasn't going into it alone. Not this time. I messaged Jenna first. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the video meeting with the financial attorney I had contacted days earlier. When both of them were present faces glowing on the screen like calm, steady anchors, I finally reached for the phone. My fingers hovered for only a second before I pressed call, then switched to speaker. Mom answered on the first ring, sobbing so loudly it almost distorted the sound. Olivia, thank God. You didn't answer the phone, making your parents worried to death. Dad's voice cut in, equally dramatic. We thought something happened. Why would you scare us like that? I leaned back against the stiff pillow, letting their theatrics bounce harmlessly off the white walls. Worried to what extent? I asked softly. Because, when the doctors called to tell you I collapsed at my graduation ceremony, you didn't show up. You didn't even call back. The silence that hit next was thick, heavy, guilty, but not in the way guilt should feel. It was the kind of silence that comes when masks slip and people scramble for new excuses. Dad recovered first. Don't bring up the past right now, he snapped. This is not the time. Your sister is in trouble. The family needs to stand together. Mom added quickly, family doesn't abandon each other. Your sister is in crisis. You're the most successful one. If you don't help, then who will? There it was. The script I had known by heart since childhood. My achievements only mattered when they could be used. My stability only mattered when it could be drained. My worth only existed in what I could provide. But for once, the lines didn't pull me in. They pushed me out. I kept my voice calm, almost steady. My doctors say I collapsed because I've been burning myself out over work, stress, no sleep, no boundaries. Do you know why? Because every time something happened to Sabrina, you called me, every bill, every mistake, every crisis. I've been carrying all of it alone. Dad scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. You always think you're the victim. We raised you. We gave you everything. Everything. The word nearly made me laugh. Everything? I repeated, quietly enough to make them pause. You gave Sabrina protection. You gave her support. You gave her excuses. You gave her second, third, 10th chances. What exactly did you give me? Besides responsibility and silence. Mom inhaled sharply, wounded. We did our best. You're twisting things. Am I? I asked. Jenna watched silently from the laptop screen, her face steady. The attorney took notes. Dad's frustration cracked into anger. Stop talking back. This is about your sister's accident. She's facing lawsuits. The loan is in your name. You need to fix it. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing slowly, feeling my heartbeat steady against the monitor's beep. When I opened them again, I felt something stronger than fear. Choice. Actually, I said, the loan is not my responsibility. You used a scan of my signature illegally. The bank needs my confirmation now. And I'm not giving it. A beat. Then Dad exploded. Are you crazy? You have to sign. If you don't, we could lose the house. Mom started crying harder. You're destroying this family. And then, like flipping a switch, everything inside me went still. This family left me alone in the hospital, I said slowly. If that's what you call family, then I choose not to belong anymore. The words hung in the air like the first crack of thunder before a storm. But instead of fear, I felt a strange lightness, like I had finally set down a burden I didn't know how to name. Dad's voice turned sharp and venomous. You're ungrateful. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I didn't negotiate. The version of me who once would have apologized, cried, begged, or reasoned was gone. I breathed in once, deeply, remembering Dr. Lane's gentle voice, my professor's words about self-abandonment. The years of exhaustion carved into my skin. And then, without thinking twice, I finally chose myself. No, I said. I will not sign. I will not pay. I will not save anyone anymore. Mom gasped as if the word itself had struck her. Dad sputtered in disbelief. I continued, steady and unshaken. I've already spoken with my attorney. I'm removing my name from every account, every bill, every loan, every shared document. You no longer have permission to use my signature or my information. If you try anything else, I'll pursue legal action. You wouldn't dare, Dad shouted. I would, I replied, and I will. The truth settled heavily between us. They weren't losing me that day. They had lost me years ago. This was just the moment they finally realized it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize. I simply lifted my finger, pressed the red button on the screen, and ended the call. Then, with the same quiet decisiveness, I blocked each number: Mom, Dad, Sabrina. One by one. Clean. Final. The room felt strangely warm after that, as if someone had opened a window I didn't know existed. I eased back against the pillows, the IV line tugging gently at my arm. For the first time, the weight I'd carried my entire life, the invisible backpack filled with guilt, expectation, obligation, slid off my shoulders. And lying there, listening to the soft rhythm of the heart monitor, I felt lighter. As if I had finally returned to myself. As if I had taken my first real breath in years. 6 months passed, then nearly a year, and the world slowly rearranged itself around me, not violently, not dramatically, but gently, like a tide pulling back to reveal land I hadn't noticed before. Healing didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small, steady moments. The first morning I woke up without dread tightening my chest. The first meal I ate without calculating how much money I should be sending home. The first time I said no without apologizing or panicking afterward. I continued therapy every week. At first, I sat stiffly in Dr. Lang's office, unsure how to fill the silence. But the more I spoke, the more I unraveled years of swallowed words, the lighter my breath became. We talked about boundaries, grief, trauma patterns, and the kind of childhood that forms a person who mistakes self-abandonment for love. She taught me how to recognize the old guilt when it slithered back into my mind, how to stop reflexively giving, how to choose rest without shame. For the first time in my life, healing wasn't something I had to earn, it was something I was allowed. Physically, my recovery was slow but steady. I reduced my work hours, took more breaks, slept more than I had in the last decade combined. My heart stabilized, my hands stopped shaking. The color returned to my face. Little by little, my body forgave me. I moved out of the cramped apartment I had once worked myself sick to afford and found a small studio in a quiet Boston neighborhood, sunlit, warm, with hardwood floors that creaked softly under my feet. I decorated it in a way that felt like a conversation with myself. Shelves full of books, thriving potted plants, photos from hikes I'd taken with Jenna, a candle that smelled like cedar and safety. Every detail mattered. Every detail said, "This home belongs to you." Career-wise, things began to shift too. With my master's degree finalized and my health improving, I applied for a clinical position at a youth support center across the river. When they offered me the job, a role with a reasonable caseload, better pay, and supervisors who valued boundaries, I cried in my car for 10 minutes before calling Jenna. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because someone finally wanted me without trying to take from me. Working with teenagers who reminded me so much of my younger self felt like purpose, not duty. And it felt like life giving something back, one gentle piece at a time. With the money I no longer funneled into my parents' emergencies, I created a small scholarship fund, nothing fancy, just enough to help 1 or 2 social work students a year, specifically those who came from chaotic or neglectful families. It felt right. It felt like alchemy, turning years of pain into support for someone who might never hear "I'm proud of you" at home. My chosen family grew naturally. Jenna, of course, loud, loving, fiercely protective. A few coworkers who understood exhaustion on a visceral level. A small support group I joined, filled with people who also came from families where love was conditional and help was currency. We celebrated each other's wins. Therapy, milestones, new jobs, tiny promotions. Birthdays with homemade cupcakes. One evening, they surprised me with a small celebration for receiving my clinical license, nothing extravagant, just takeout food, laughter, and a card they all signed with the words, "We're proud of you." No one had ever said that to me without expecting something in return. I cried quietly in the kitchen while they joked in the living room, letting the warmth in my chest seep into places I thought were permanently numb. As for my parents and Sabrina, information trickled in through distant acquaintances, old neighbors, and occasional Facebook posts I didn't ask to see. Their financial troubles worsened after I cut ties. One of their properties was repossessed. Sabrina faced legal consequences for the car accident and had to attend mandated classes. My parents scrambled without the safety net I once provided, and from what I heard, They had begun turning on each other, each blaming the others for the fallout. They sent emails, sometimes long, meandering apologies filled with excuses. We were stressed. We didn't know the whole situation. Families fight. You misunderstood. Not once did they say, "We hurt you." Not once did they say, "We're sorry." Not once did they say, "We should have been there when you collapsed." I read their messages only once, then archived them without replying, not out of hatred, not out of anger, but because healing had shown me something I'd never understood before. I was not responsible for fixing people who broke me. One evening in early spring, the air still crisp, but the trees just beginning to bud, I returned to my university for the first time since my own collapsed graduation. A new cohort of master's students was walking the stage, gowns fluttering in the wind, tassels swinging with each step. I sat in the back row of the crowd, anonymous among cheering families and friends. Instead of pain, I felt a soft nostalgia settle over me. The keynote speaker, a graduate from their class, stepped up to the podium and began talking about boundaries, self-worth, and the courage to walk away from people who use love as leverage. Her voice rang through the courtyard, steady and bright. "Sometimes," she said, "choosing yourself means losing a family you never truly had." The words sank into me like warm sunlight. I placed a hand on my chest, feeling the calm, even rhythm of my heartbeat, strong, steady, mine. I realized then that I wasn't sad anymore. Not angry, not grieving, just free. As the applause rose around me, I whispered the truth I had carried through the hardest months of my life, words that finally felt like closure instead of confession. On the day I collapsed on that stage, the doctors called my parents. They never came. When I woke up in the hospital, my sister posted a photo. Family day without the drama. Days later, still weak and covered in wires, I saw 75 missed calls and a message. "We need you. Answer immediately." Without thinking twice, I did what I should have done long ago. I didn't answer as the obedient daughter they expected. I answered as the woman I had finally become. That year, I lost a family. But that year, I found myself. And as the wind rustled through the graduation banners overhead, I knew I would never go back to who I was before. Not ever again.